Now, what is going on, guys? Today we are going to talk about CORS, also known as cross-origin resource sharing, what it is, why you need it, when you need it, and how you can actually implement them in your Express application. So let's talk about the wording here first, okay? Cross-origin resource sharing. Let's talk about resource first. So on the web, or at least if we're talking about REST, everything, or pretty much everything, is like a resource, right? You have these HTTP verbs, get, put, post, delete, and with these verbs, you can do specific things with resources, right? If you do like a get request, you can load like a particular resource, like retrieve one. If you make a post request, you can create one, and so on. So somehow, like if you look at just the word resource, it's about how you can actually deal with resources and how these resources are shared. And the next thing you might ask is, well, there's this word cross-origin. So what's an origin in the first place? And an origin is like defined or characterized by three things. It's the protocol, the host name, and a port. So two origins are considered equal if and only if all of these three things are the same. Okay, so if you have https mydomain.com on port 8080 and http mydomain.com on port 8080 would be considered different origins because here the protocol is different, right? Also, if like only one component has to be different, so there can be multiple components different, right? So if you go on port 8081, then not only is the protocol different, but also the port. So that means if at least one of these components are different, then it is considered to be, then the origins are considered to be different. And when we're talking about CORS, we are mainly talking about the communication between a browser and a server. And this entire CORS thing is not relevant for like server to server communication. It's like purely like a browser to server kind of thing, or like a CORS compliant HTTP client if you want to be really precise, which basically all major browsers are, and the server. And actually this entire thing sounds fancy, but it's actually quite simple. So this entire thing mainly relies on HTTP headers. So when you make a request, or when your JavaScript code is making like a request to some server, then the browser checks like the URL where you want to make the request to. And if it sees that it's actually a different origin, so for example, you are at mybank.com and you make some request to myapigate.com, then the browser knows, hold on a second, like this is a cross-origin request. Then in that case, it typically attaches like this origin header. Okay, so if you make a cross-origin request, the origin header is attached. Now, if it's not a cross-origin request, then browsers typically don't attach it. So say if this was not an API gateway, but also like the server that has rendered this HTML page, then you would not have this origin header. I just wanted to point out this origin header first because you're going to see it like a lot if you look at the developer console. But the main idea here is actually that the server is doing whatever it's supposed to do. And then in the response, it returns one additional header. And this is like crucial. And this header is called access control allow origin. And what the server basically means with that, it says, hey, I'm expecting like traffic from like this particular origin. And then you basically get the response back. And the browser, if it sees like this access control allow origin header, it looks at this header. And then if the value in the header and the own origin are not the same, it's going to be blocked. So you can see that in this case. So say you have like some website IO, you make like a request here. The server might even do whatever it's supposed to do, right? Maybe this is like some endpoint where you don't have authentication, like it doesn't matter. The server is like, the only thing the server is doing in addition is it's going to attach like this header. And as soon as the browser sees this header, it's going to compare it to its own origin. And since the origin is some website.com, actually the browser would block. And this is the important thing to understand. So in this entire scenario, the browser is actually like blocking and is not basically providing the response to like the JavaScript code. So that means with CORS, or by using like this header, you have like very fine-grained control over what websites can talk to your server, like what front ends. Okay, so and this assumes like a CORS compliant HTTP client communication to like the server, because what you could also say is, well, if this is just like an HTTP header, I can just take Postman and I can just I can just put in like the correct header, and then the server is going to respond with whatever I want. And that is totally true. So obviously it's kind of like, or you need both parts, right? You need the server that returns the header, and you need CORS compliant HTTP client, which Postman is not, right? So Postman doesn't care about what CORS header it returns, right? It will not return you an error. That's not the point of it. So this is the important thing to understand. With CORS, you have fine-grained control over what websites are actually allowed to make requests to your server, and the actual request is actually being blocked like on the browser level if it's required. And CORS also allows you to kind of relax like certain security requirements that you have on the web, right? So for example, what you could do, I mean, would be a bad idea, but what you could do is you could return like star, which means I don't care, like anyone can talk to my server. If you return star, then even mywebsite.com or even this other website here would be able to make a request. Typically, you want to have a very fine-grained control over who has access to your resource. Yeah, and that is pretty much like the entire idea of CORS. Yeah, and there's one more thing I want to talk about, and that is this idea of CORS preflights. So in this entire web security model, some requests are considered to be complex or a little bit dangerous. And that's why there's like additional security actions, so to say, that the browser is performing to make sure that you're not doing like an invalid operation. And again, this only applies if we're talking about like cross-origin requests. So that means if this is mywebsite.com and this is also mywebsite.com, you will not have a pre-flight. Okay, so this only applies if this is like some other origin, right? So for example, my API gateway.com. And the idea here is that if you try to perform certain operations, or if you have specific custom headers, then instead of directly making the request, or that the JavaScript is trying to do, the browser is going to pre-flight this request. So that means it's going to make an HTTP request with like to the server with the options HTTP verb. Yeah, so this options verb, this options request is basically a normal HTTP verb. So just like get, put, post, delete, but it does not have a request body. Okay, so you make this request and the server hopefully like responds. If it does not respond, the browser is not going to make the follow-up request. Usually like with a 200 status, and the server also or typically responds with additional headers. So for example, there's like one header where you can specify which HTTP verbs you allow. So for example, you might respond like with just delete, and then the browser will look at these headers and will say, oh yeah, okay, like the server said in my pre-flight request that it allows this particular delete request, so I'm going to do the follow-up request. So for one, you can specify which, or the server can specify which HTTP verbs it allows, but it can also send this access control allow origin header back. And if this header does not match like with the website's origin, the browser is also going to block. So as you can see, the browser is basically being a little bit careful before it tries to attempt like a dangerous operation. And that is mainly the idea of having like a pre-flight. So certain things are considered to be critical. That's why, to be sure, we make an options request. We ask a server, hey man, what operations can I do? It will return, hey, you can use the following HTTP verbs. We require you that the request is coming from the following origin. And then the browser is going to kind of look at the headers. And then if all the conditions match, like the HTTP verb is allowed and the origin where the server expects traffic from, so basically from this header, is the same, then it will actually perform the request. Otherwise, it's going to block. And by the way, this behavior, it cannot be turned off. So preflights cannot be turned off, and CORS itself also cannot be turned off. Okay, so there's no way that you can use some JavaScript or whatever to turn this off, simply because it would be a big security issue. Yeah, so now that we have seen preflights, let's just take a look at the code, and let's just see how it works. So I have a pretty, let me make this a little bit bigger maybe. I don't know. I think it's fine, right? I have like a simple Express application. So it's just a server that runs on port 8080. And we have like a router, and this router has like you can make a GET request, and you can also make a delete request to /item. So that's it pretty much. I just wanted to show you like how this works. Let me just run this. Okay, so I have Node-mod installed. I'm just going to run this. And I just wanted to show you how that works. I'm just going to make a GET request, and let's just look at the headers that we get back. So as you can see, we have a couple of headers: X powered by, content type, content length, e-tag, connection, but nothing about like CORS or anything. And this is what we want to change, because you actually need like a CORS header in order for your front end to talk to your backend. I'm just going to stop like the server, and I'm going to install one additional package, which is called CORS. So this is like a very popular package over here. You can see its documentation there. The usage is actually very, very simple. So the idea is you have like this package, you import it, and if you want to allow all cross-origin requests, you just like call this thing, and it's always going to return like the star in the request, which means I don't care about like the origin. Or you can also specify that you only allow specific types of origin, and that is actually the case you should do. So having like this star, like I would really not recommend doing that, right? Because you know which front end is going to consume like the request, so you should restrict that. And the way you can do that is, let's just go back, and now we got the package installed. So I'm just going to make a directory, and I'm going to say create a file here. I'm going to call it index.js, and inside of here I'm just going to import like this package, and I'm just going to say CORS, and then I'm going to paste this value here from the documentation. What you can see here is that we are specifying like this origin field, and this is essentially the value that we're going to return in this access control allow origin. I think in our case it was actually mybank.com, right? If you have pre-flight requests, then sometimes you have like the HTTP status 204, which not all browsers support, so that's why it's a very good practice to use like 200. And the key thing here to understand is that you need to use like this package and pass like your options. And what this returns is it's actually returning a middleware. So this call here returns a function like this, request response next, that, you know, does some stuff, and it eventually, that does some stuff, and then eventually calls, I don't know, next. Okay, this is important to understand. It might be a little bit unintuitive if you're not, like if you haven't seen it before, that like a function call itself is returning a function. But that's basically how this works. Okay, and the only thing we need to do to make this work is we just need to import it here, and make sure that you import ./CORS, so not the package CORS, but ./CORS, which is like our custom CORS middleware. And then directly before, and this is important, before you plug in like your router, just plug in like your CORS middleware. I'm just going to call this CORS middleware, right, to indicate that it's like custom middleware. Okay, so that's it. And it's pretty simple. So let's just run this. And let's go to Postman. Yeah, so let's just try this out. Let's make a request. And let's take a look at the headers. So you can see now we have like this access control allow origin header. And it is exactly mybank.com. So the same thing that we specified over here. And now it's getting interesting. So because what we could do here is we could allow multiple origins. So let's say I want to make mybank.com and I want to have, I don't know, mybank2.com, right? This is like a different host, so that's why the origins are different. And now the package behaves in an interesting way, because if you now make this request, you can see that, wait, hold on a second, like somehow the header is gone. And that makes actually, might be a little bit confusing at first, but actually it makes total sense. So initially, if you only have one value, then the server knows exactly what value for the header it has to return. But if you specify more than one value, then it actually doesn't know, right? Because if you allow requests from two origins, how should the server know which origin or which value it should return, right? So let's assume you're on mybank2.com and it randomly returns mybank.com. Well, then the browser would block, which you don't want. And that is actually where this origin header comes into play. So if you go to this headers tab, you can basically say, okay, I want to activate like origin. I want to send the origin header along. That's what we've talked about, right? If it's a cross-origin request, the browser is going to send the origin header along. And in here, you can say, okay, it's like mybank.com. And this is also interesting. Let's just try this out and see what happens. And this is interesting because you see it's not there. Why could it not be there? Look at the origin. Little mistake, it needs to be HTTPS, right? Because remember, the protocol is important. So let's try this again. You make HTTPS. And now you have it. Yeah. Okay, well, that makes sense. If you have more than one value and you don't have an origin header in the request, then it's not going to return the actual header. Makes total sense. And what you can also do is, let's say I have like mybank2. You can see now it's like mybank2.com. Interesting. And let's say mybank3, which we haven't specified. Then you can see again, it does not have the header. And by the way, if it does not have this access control allow origin header, the browser is going to block right away. Okay, because it knows it's a cross-origin request, but there's no header from the server, so it's going to block. So this is the important part to understand. And the only other part I wanted to cover are like the options requests. Per default, if you have like the Express server up and running and you just make like some options requests, you can see that, okay, it somehow returns status 200, but there's like no access control allow origin header. What you can see here is that it does have this get head put patch and so on, which is an additional header, which is the default that the server has. So it basically says, hey, if you're calling this, you're allowed to use the following HTTP methods, HTTP verbs, which you can also restrict in the CORS settings, by the way. But you can find that in your documentation. So that is interesting. Now the issue is, as I already said, if you don't enable preflights, if the browser is making this preflight and it just sees like this response and there's no access control allow origin header, it's not even going to make the second request, right? So it's not even going to make this request over here because the server did not return like a proper CORS header. And this is what we need to plug in right here, and it's actually quite simple. So let's go to a file, and what you will see very often is that people do something like app.options, and then they put star, and then they put the CORS middleware. And what this basically means is, for all optional requests, run them through our CORS middleware. If we go back, maybe let's leave out the origin header for now. Okay, let's just run this. You can see, okay, still no headers. Makes total sense, because remember, we have this array of two origins. If you go back to this and you delete that, and you delete this, and you save this, and by the way, I have like hot reload enabled, and you run this, interesting, okay, then you see the access control allow origin header again. So always remember, if it's only one value, you always get this thing. If you have two values, then the behavior depends. I think we should not have deleted it because I just wanted to show you what happens if you have two values. So as you can see, you don't get anything. If you put like an origin that is not on the allowed list, you can also see that you don't get a header. But if you do put an origin that is on the allowed list, then bam, you see you get the access control allow origin, and then in that case the browser is going to make the request. So I know it's a lot of details for like this little package, so to say, but I think these are the issues that you encounter when you are actually trying to implement this. Because, you know, most people, they will just show you like this and that's it. And you might be wondering, well, why is it still not working? Okay. And I just wanted to show you like all the details and the caveats that you need to know in order to properly use this package. So as you can see, it's very simple. And if you want to know more about it, I would highly encourage you to read the documentation here. Yeah, you can even have like a custom function that runs here if you want. There's also more things you can specify, so not just the origin, but you can specify the methods. So right, this is the header we have seen before. You can specify like credentials. This is very important when it comes to sessions and to logging things in. I also have a video series about that if you're interested. That's it pretty much. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe. I hope this helped you to understand this entire concept like properly, not just on the surface, but like how this package behaves. And I think once you get the hang of it, it's like really easy. Just include it in your project and you'll be fine. And if you're implementing a server to server communication, like don't implement this package, obviously, because you don't want like a browser to talk to your server, right? If you're just talking about server to server communication. Yeah, so that's it pretty much. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe, and I hope I'll see you in the next video. If you have a question, you can leave a comment down below or also send me a tweet. My Twitter handle is @productioncoder. Thank you so much and see you around. Bye bye.